Hello, everyone. This is Joe Firestone for Empowering Democracy. And this is another Dump the Corruption show. And the topic will be the industry view, outside spending, meaning we'll be going over the outside spending for the major industry that contribute to campaigns, spending by super PACs, spending also by carry committees, spending on ads, spending not coordinated with the actual political campaigns and the political parties. So it's that kind of spending that we will be going over. I will be joined in a while, probably about 15 minutes or so, by Dee Peers, the host, of Around the World with Dee and Friends. But she and Madeline are not yet finished with Dee's show. They still have another article to do. This was a particularly irritating show because of we were reporting and commenting and analyzing the racist remarks of Itamar Ben-Gvir. Very, very distressing. The whole thing was very distressing. So let's get back to the main business of this show. I'm sorry I took us away for even a second. And I'm going to get right to the open secrets data on that spending in just a second here. Just a second. Oh, wait, I've not been. I'm sorry, I don't believe I. Here we go. I've been sharing the wrong thing on Facebook. Okay, so when we ended on Wednesday, we were talking about the spending, of interest groups. And we were seeing how heavy and how substantial that particular spending was. What I want to bring up now, because we didn't have a chance, to get to it, was all disclosed outside spending by the industries of the spenders, as recorded, by Open Secrets. And we'll go over the 2022 election, and I might go over, depending on time considerations and things like that, the spending for the 2020 cycle, as well. But let's look briefly at the sector totals first, without actually breaking it down into super PACs and carry committees and single candidates, super PACs, and see what that actually looks like. So, spending by ideology single issue groups, outside spending. In other words, not spending on the campaigns, not spending directly by political parties, though there is some outside spending by parties here that we will go over. But spending, by ideology single issue groups, outside spending by ideology single issue groups in 2022 was $1.9 billion, not million dollars, $1 billion. And that was 83.64% of all the outside spending. Outside spending by party committees, in other words, not directed at campaigns, not coordinated with campaigns, but spending done by party committees, was $254,140,191, or 11.13%. So between these first two categories I mentioned, that was 95% of the outside spending. There's a big gap between the roughly 84% of spending by the ideology single issue groups and the 11% of spending by the party committees. And there's another very large gap between the next category, the fire sector, $69.5 million in 2022, 3.04% of what was spent. There's another gap between that and the party committees. But taking those first three categories together, we have 98% of the outside spending. Then we come to outside spending by labor unions. That was $36,622,101. It was only 1.6% of the outside spending. Now, when the Supreme Court, by its Citizens United decision in 2002, when they made it legal to do unlimited outside spending by certain organizations, claiming that was speech and could not be regulated by the federal authorities or prohibited by Congress. When they made that particular decision, they tended in rhetoric to equate spending by corporations and spending by wealthy people with spending by labor, saying outside spending by labor, well, they have an equal right to outside spending. Right. But between the fire sector, the party committees, and the ideology single issue groups, that's 98% of the external spending which was made legal by the Supreme Court. So practically speaking, there is no equality in terms of right to spend, because labor just doesn't have the capability to spend that the ideology single issue groups, the party committees, and the fire sector have. They just can't spend that money, even if they wished, to do so. And to compare labor spending, with other spending was certainly a fallacious argument. To imply that there's equality in that kind of spending and equal freedom. The spending of labor, the outside spending of labor, and their capability of spending the unlimited amount of monies on campaigns, as long as the spending isn't in any way coordinated with campaigns. In no way is that an equal right, because there isn't near an equal capability to spend. That's the first point, I want to make here. And I think, it's a pretty important one. The corporations in back of ideology single issue issues, in back of the party committees, in back of the fire sector, have almost an unlimited capability to do the unlimited spending. But labor doesn't have that capability. There's no equality here at all. Supreme Court freed up the corporations and the rich to do all of this spending. But in no way was labor freed up to do all of this spending, because they didn't have the capability to do it. So let's look at some of the breakdowns here, because they're very interesting. Let's look at the super PACs. The super PACs by themselves, there may be some discrepancy here. Let me go back to the old one for just a minute. I don't think the figures exactly jibe, probably because the reporting doesn't exactly jibe. It looks like there's something like $2.5 billion in total being spent here. But when we look at the super PACs alone, as opposed to the sector totals, we see that the super PACs alone are spending $2.7 billion. Oh, wait a minute. I see where my mistake is. The total raised by super PACs was $2.7 billion. The total spent by super PACs in 2022 was only roughly $1.4 billion. So I was, comparing apples and oranges, a bit. So that explains the discrepancy, I thought. I saw. There's a filter here also reported on for super PACs, looking at the viewpoint of the super PACs. Conservative super PACs spent $832,350,737. They did 61% of the spending. The so-called liberal super PACs, and I say so-called because that term is always misused, in my view, spent $468,316,299, or 34.29%. So conservative super PACs vastly outnumbered the spending of the liberally oriented super PACs. And then other super PACs that were deemed not to fit into either of those categories spent $65 million, or roughly 5% of what was spent by those super PACs. Those are the figures looking at the viewpoint of the groups. if you look at this in terms of recipient parties, spending against the Republicans was $435 million, or about 32.08%. Spending against the Democrats was $418 million, so very close, about 30.76%. Spending for the Republicans was $311 million, or roughly 23%. Spending for the Democrats was about $194 million, or roughly 14.25%. So in the against spending, there's not that much difference between the two groups. But in the spending for the parties, there is a big difference, okay, in favor of the Republicans. So super PAC spending as an aggregate favors conservatives, okay, in viewpoint, and Republicans by party. So that's an interesting result that we can report on here. When we look at the carry committees are similar to, but not the same as super PACs. I'm just going to read this. In addition to super PACs, which can raise and spend unlimited funds, and regular political action committees which raise money via contributions capped at $5,000 per year, there are several other vehicles donors can use to attempt to influence elections. These include carry committees, also known as hybrid PACs, which maintain one account for making contributions to candidates in the same way regular PACs do, and a separate account for making the independent expenditures like super PACs. In addition, there are 527 organizations and 501c nonprofit groups. The 527s can be entirely political and must disclose their donors. However, 501c4 groups can shield their donors' identities, but under IRS rules, can't have politics as their primary purpose. So in other words, if they make 49% of their contributions to politics, then they can shield the identity, okay, of their donors. So I'm going to let in Dee right now. She has arrived, as I said she would. And welcome, Dee Pierce, the host
Thank you.
Around the World with Dee, Around the World with Dee and Friends.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. It sounds like a great show tonight.
Well, thank you for coming, Dee. It's a very illuminating show, really. Okay, already we have a few comments to say hello. Steve Wolfbrand is here. Kay is here. Kay Ryan. And Dee is in the comments herself, okay, thus far. Okay, so let me go back to presenting. I guess I had lost my articles when I shifted screens. So let me once again present the Open Secrets page, okay, that I'm reading from here. Yeah, this is the one I had. So this is spending that's been done by the carry committees. Okay, I already did the super PACs, and the spending by the super PACs was something like, in 2022, was something like $1.6 billion. And I was just reading, uh, trying to illuminate the spending by the carry committees. That was $566,607,492. Okay, but what's the difference between the carry committees and the super PACs? So I just had been reading this paragraph, which I will reread, so you are clear about that. In addition to super PACs, which can raise and spend unlimited funds, and regular political action committees, which raise money via contributions capped at $5,000 per year, there are several other vehicles donors can use to attempt to influence elections, to attempt perhaps to exercise their speech, as the Supreme Court would put it, a very silly Supreme Court. These include carry committees, also known as hybrid PACs, which maintain one account for making contributions to candidates in the same way regular PACs would do, and a separate account for making independent expenditures. That's the outside spending we're talking about here. Like super PACs, in addition, there are 527 organizations and 501c nonprofit groups. The 527s can be entirely political and must disclose their donors. However, 501c4 groups can shield their donors' identities, but under IRS rules, can't have politics as their primary purpose. So let's be clear here. The super PACs do have to disclose all spending greater than $200 if a contribution is made. They don't have to disclose the spending that's under $200. But $200 and over, they have to disclose the spending. So super PACs, in general, are not what we call really dark money. Okay, unless, of course, the contributors to the super PACs themselves are havens for dark money. And that can be the case because 501c4 groups, the groups that can shield, their donors' identities, are, of course, free to contribute to super PACs. And they don't have to disclose their donors when they contribute to super PACs. They also don't have to disclose their donors when they directly contribute. This is true as long as only 49%, some odd, less than 50%, of their activities have politics as their primary purpose. Of course, I don't think that rule is enforced very tightly by the IRS, so things are even looser than that. But looking at the carry committees here, we see that it's fairly evenly divided between carry committees that have a viewpoint classified as conservative and carry committees that have a viewpoint classified as liberals. As liberal. Those with a conservative viewpoint spent nearly $284 million during the 2022 campaign. That was 50.1%. Super PACs, I should say carry committees with a liberal point of view, spent $282 million, 49.7%. So the spending was very close. Then there were other groups that didn't fit in the two categories. They spent about $1,085,000, or roughly 0.2%. So, I have to go to the super PACs because I missed the trick here. I'll go back to the super PACs in just a minute. But for the record here, it looks like expenditures are fairly equal. You see the bar graph up there. Looks like they're fairly equal too. But let's change the viewpoint here and look at the recipient parties for a second. And we see that spending against the Democrats exceeded by a little bit spending against the Republicans. This is Carry Committee spending. $216 million, 36.1%. And spending, that was 36.1% of all spending. And spending against the Republicans was almost $210 million, or 36.97%. So in spending against, these two sides are close. When we get to spending for Democrats, it was greater for Democrats, $75.8 million, or 13.3%. Spending for Republicans was $65.6 million, or 11.57%. So in the spending for category, the Democrats had about a $10 million advantage. In the spending against categories, the Republicans had about a $6 million advantage. But the Carry Committee spending is pretty close between the two parties, as it was between the viewpoints, of the groups as well. So I've now gone back to the group screen. Again, the total spending there was $566,607,492. Those Carry Committees spend a lot, not as much as super PACs, but they are a very big factor. I pointed out before, super PACs was spending $1.6 billion, but the Carry Committees were spending roughly one-third as much, $567 million. It's interesting to look at who actually did the spending and how big it was. The Congressional Leadership Fund, which I believe is it's a conservative fund, which means it must be on the Republican side. They spent $227 million. And the House Majority PAC, which I believe is the Democratic PAC of Nancy Pelosi, spent about $145.3 million. So in 2022, the Republicans in the Carry Committee category considerably outspent the Democrats. To Protect Our Future PAC, which I believe was funded by Samuel Bankman-Fried, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly. That contributed $29 million. That identifies itself as a PAC, but it's actually a carry committee, as we see here. VoteVets.org spent, oh, that's interesting. Seems like, oh no, that's the raised column, so that's why it's different. VoteVets spent $23 million. Future Forward USA spent $23 million. That was a carry committee founded, by another of the was that the cryptocurrency billionaires? And I think that was founded by the LinkedIn billionaire, if I remember correctly. That they spent $23 million just about in round figures. And Priorities USA, which is another liberal point of view group, spent $16.5 million. Protect Ohio Values, which is probably a conservative group. I was going to guess that it was supporting J.D. Vance, and so it was. They spent nearly $16 million. Okay, American Dream Federal Action, another conservative carry committee, spent $12.6 million. National Victory Action Front, another conservative committee, spent $9.9 million. The Working Families Party had a carry committee. $8 million was spent by them. In 2022, the Democratic Majority for Israel, their carry committee, and I have to check to see if they had a super PAC. We just were talking about, the DMFI in Dee's program tonight. They spent $7.3 million in 2022, in that election cycle, and they spent a good part of that against the campaign, of Nina Turner, in Ohio, and were instrumental in defeating her. The Giffords PAC, which is a carry committee, that carry committee was founded by Gabby Giffords and Mark Kelly, if I'm not mistaken, in Arizona. They spent $5.1 million. Getting down to move on for a moment. I guess I have to mention the American Bridge to the 21st century, because what they did was kind of notable. They spent $4.3 million, but they raised $51.98 million, almost $52 million. So basically, they're saving $48 million for the 2024 campaign. MoveOn.org also had a striking discrepancy. They spent $3.3 million, but they raised $60 million. So they, as well, were saving money for the 2024 campaign. That's actually kind of striking, I think. Is there anything else like that? No, nothing so striking as those things. So I'm not going to mention the smaller ones. Let's see if Ready for Ron is no. Okay, so those are some of the carry committee groups. Now, I have to return to the super PAC category for a few minutes, because, I did not recognize that the super PACs didn't scroll down far enough to see that the total spent by the super PACs. I made an error also. I said before that super PAC spending was 1.6 million. It wasn't. It was 1.4 million, or closer to 1.4 million. And here I have to mention that the total raised by super PACs was, 2.7 billion. The amount spent was 1.4 billion in 2022. So they were basically saving 1.4 billion for 2024. I gave you this summary data, already, but I didn't get down to the individual groups. And I think it's important to look at those to see where the money is coming from. So it's also important, I think, to look at the money spent versus the money raised in 2022, as we have seen. The Senate Leadership Fund, which is Republican, that's basically Mitch McConnell's deal. They spent $246 million. It's just a huge amount of money on a campaign. They raised $289 million. $290 million, really closer to. So they were saving just about $44 million for the 2024 campaign. And the Senate Majority PAC, which is the Democratic group, or the Liberal Viewpoint group, so-called. I don't think it really is, because that's Chuck Schumer's super PAC. And they ain't very lefty, of course, when you come right down to it. But they spent $162 million in 2022. And they left on the table close to $80 million, whereas the Republicans left about $44 million on the table for 2024. But Chuck Schumer's PAC left about $80 million on the table for 2024. Club for Growth Action, which is a well-known Republican-oriented group, spent almost $70 million, and the amount they raised was $89 million. So roughly $19 million left over for 2024. The Americans for Prosperity Action, again a conservative group, they spent about $69.5 million, and they raised about $78 million. Georgia Honor, which was a super PAC for supporting Senator Warnock, Raphael Warnock, in 2022. They raised $60.6 million, and they spent $60.8 million in order to get him elected, which they successfully did. But that is certainly a lot of money for a Senate race, and that wasn't the only source of money for him. He probably got some of the money from from Chuck Schumer's super PAC also. Georgia Honor, nice name. The LCV Victory Fund, that's another liberal super PAC, $33.3 million they spent, but they raised $59 million for the 2024 campaign. In other words, $25 million are left over for that campaign. The Women Voters Super PAC spent $29.9 million, and they raised $34.6 million. So there's some money, but not a hell of a lot left over for the 2024 campaign. The Wisconsin Truth PAC, which was Ron Johnson's super PAC, spent $28.9 million, and Ron Johnson won. They spent more than they raised. They spent $30.1 million supporting Ron Johnson. They probably figured it was Ron Johnson's last term anyway, because he hadn't been too well and only ran because the Republicans really needed him to run in Wisconsin. The United Democracy Project, which, to give you some background on that, that is the super PAC that was founded, by AIPAC. So that's another Israeli support group, though they might, not even give money directly for Israel, but in opposition to candidates who they don't think are pro-Israel enough. But they contributed, they spent $26.1 million in the 2022 campaign. They raised nearly $36 million, so they had about $10 million left over for 2024. The Saving Arizona PAC I guess the X that's there for the UDP, I guess that represents the idea that that particular super PAC from AIPAC claims to be neither liberal nor conservative in their outlook. So the Saving Arizona PAC, which is actually a super PAC, of course, and conservative, they were supporting Blake Masters, who ran in Arizona and who lost, if I recall, to Mark Kelly. They spent $25.4 million, and they raised $31.8 million. So interestingly, they left $6 million on the table. And that was not good strategy, since Blake Masters lost. So, American Leadership Action, another conservative group, super PAC, spent $19.6 million, raised $21.9 million. They supported Oz in Pennsylvania. They were Oz's super PAC. Oz being, of course, Dr. Oz, also known as Mehmet Oz, also known as Dr. Oz. Well, Dr. Oz had a super PAC that spent $19.6 million. He was vastly outraised and outspent by John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. Then there was the Honor Pennsylvania super PAC that supported a guy who ran against Oz in the primary, specifically McCormick. I forget his first name. He was a very Wall Street kind of guy, though. And his super PAC spent $19.3 million, almost as much as the Oz super PAC did. And they also left money on the table. Maybe the two super PACs are run by the same people, who knows? But they spent the 19.3 million and they raised 21.3 million. So they left that money sitting on the table, even though their candidate got beat. The Make America Great Again super PAC, they spent $15 million on campaigns. They're also classified as conservative, but obviously they are Trumpist. They raised $73 million, spent $15 million. So they left $58 million for use in the 2024 campaign. Okay, the Our American Century super PAC, I don't know where they were operating. They raised $13.6 million, spent $14.1 million. The Sentinel Action Fund, another conservative group, spent $13.3 million, and they were just opposing people. They spent $14.1 million. Presumably, they were opposing Democrats because they're a conservative grouping. Family Friendly Action PAC, which is actually a super PAC, as we see, these are all super PACs here, $10.6 million. That's a liberal super PAC. They really overspent compared to what they raised. They must have had some money left over from a previous campaign. But they're a liberal super PAC, and they spent $14.6 million. So they spent a good deal. There's a School Freedom Fund, which is conservative. They raised about $10.5 million. They spent about $17.8 million. So they outspent what they raised by a considerable amount. The Opportunity Matters Fund, another conservative group, spent $10 million. Spent $10 million, raised $37 million. So they saved $27 million for the 2024 campaign. And there's the Black PAC. They spent $9.7 million and they raised $17.7 million. So they still had $8 million left over for 2024. The American Policy Fund, which is a conservative group, spent $9.5 million and raised $10.3 million. So they raised a little more than they spent. The Somos PAC, which is a liberal super PAC, raised $9.3 million and spent about $14 million. So they had money left over from a previous campaign to spend, and they spent it. They spent it on Democrats, I'm sure, because they're classified as a liberal super PAC. Okay, Progress Pinellas, if I'm not, was a group supporting Lynn. I'm not sure who Lynn is. She may be a congressperson. They raised $9.2 million and spent about $10 million. National Association of Realtors Congressional Fund, Super PAC, spent $8.5 million and raised $17.5 million. So they had roughly what? Roughly $9 million left over for the 2024 campaign. Planned Parenthood votes a super PAC spent $8.2 million in the 2022 campaign and raised $26.5 million. So they saved about $18 million for the 2024 campaign. I don't know whether that was wise, or not, given the decision of the Supreme Court following the campaign. Following the campaign. It seems like they needed to spend a lot more. And maybe they figured they couldn't do anything to head it off anyway. So they wanted to save money for future reasons. Okay, there's a lot more here. There are 2,476 entries from super PACs here. Since we're still in the 8 million spending at that level, maybe we should look at the second page here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go over all of these. No, I guess I'm not going to go over all of these. But you're getting a picture. There were a lot of super PACs that spent considerable money. I'm looking at a group of super PACs here that's in this $6 million, $7 million range. And there are a lot of them. Most of them, and the majority of them, I would say, are conservative as opposed to liberal super PACs. There's one here in this list called the Crypto Freedom Super PAC. And they spent $6 million supporting candidates who were friendly to cryptocurrency, that is. They raised $9.4 million, so they saved $3 million for the 2024 campaign. I thought it was interesting to mention that. So in 2022, super PACs spent a lot more than the carry committees. Let's look at some of the other categories here. There are single candidate super PACs. Let's see how much they spent. They spent $350,928,496. That's big spending on single candidates. These super PACs focus almost exclusively on one candidate, either by advertising in support of that candidate or attacking his or her opponents. Like other super PACs, they can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money. So they provide a convenient way for wealthy supporters to contribute large sums to bolster these favored candidates. Those super PACs are supposed to operate independently and refrain from coordinating their strategy with someone running for office. These groups are often created and run by individuals with very close ties to the candidate they support. So, okay, as you may know, there are very easy ways for super PACs to coordinate with campaigns. For example, in the Shontel Brown campaign, she was using the red box techniques to advise super PACs that were in her favor as to what kinds of ads they should be running. It was transparent she was doing that. She would take ads, in the newspaper, okay, and put a red box around them. And so the super PACs knew that her campaign uh, was concerned about this or that, okay, or the other issue, guiding the super PACs as to how to spend their money in favor, okay, of her. Everybody knew that was going on. Okay, the Federal Elections Committee did nothing to stop it. That violates, by the way, the rules against coordinating with the campaigns. That actually should have been enough to get the IRS on their tail. But as far as I know, that never happened. They just violated the rules for super PACs, okay, with impunity. In this category, there was a heavy advantage in the single candidate super PAC category. There was a heavy advantage for conservatives. 233,457,066.5% for conservatives. 113,784,000, about 32.4%, for liberals. So conservatives had a big advantage in that particular category. Let me scroll down. So, okay, in addition to what you saw before that was spent, I think they double listed something here. Okay, I think it was in the super PAC category. Georgia Honor, which was the Warnock super PAC, okay, was recorded as having exactly this amount, okay, of money. And so it seems to have been listed in this category and in the other category, which probably should not, okay, have been the case. The same is true for Ron Johnson. So I see there are duplicate entries here. And so there's no reason really to mention them because we've already mentioned them under the super PAC category. Okay, itself. So it looks like the single candidate super PACs actually became, okay, a duplicate listing. Okay, and there was nothing new there. There's a category here called outspending. Races in which outside spending exceeds candidate spending in the 2022 election cycle. So that's very interesting by itself. In the Alabama Senate race, there was 20.7 million candidate spending. Outside spending was almost $31.9 million. In California, District 13, I'm not sure whose district that was. I could find out, but I don't think I'll look it up because time is running on here. $6.7 million was spent by the candidate. And the outside spending was $15.5 million. California District 22, there was $7.4 million in candidate spending and $26,128,000 in outside spending. These districts that we're giving here are congressional districts. You can see in some of them there was huge outside spending. In California District 42, $1.8 million was spent in the campaign. $2.4 million was in outside spending. I'm just can't resist this. I'm just going to open a new tab here and see who the candidates were in California District 22, because I don't remember. David Valadao was the Republican incumbent and winner in that race, and Rudy Salas was a Democratic candidate in that race. I remember there was a lot of outside spending there. 26 million, in outside spending. A lot of oppositional spending to Rudy Salas. A lot of oppositional spending to Valadao also. So I think that's of some interest. In California District 42, wow, that had 7.4 million in candidate spending and 26 million in outside spending. California District 42, 1.8 million candidate spending, 2.372 million in outside spending. I'm not going to say much about that. But California District 49, candidate spending 13.7 million, outside spending 15.9 million. So let's see who was running there. That should be interesting. Mike Levin was the incumbent winner, and Brian Marriott, was the Republican, who lost. Heavy opposition spending from super PACs in connection to Brian Marriott. In the opposition category, he had a net loss of 7 million, whereas for Mike Levin, there was only a net loss of maybe 5 million. So really, that's how Mike Levin actually won that race. It was the super PACs that actually determined that particular race. In the direct spending, they were pretty equal. Well, actually, 1 million more was spent, okay, by Mike Levin. But it was really the super PAC difference that did it for Mike Levin in that particular race. Okay, let's see if there's anything else compelling here. Obviously, you can see a lot of super PAC money is being spent. Sometimes it exceeds direct contributions to candidates, and it has an influence, okay, in many of these districts. In Illinois District 15, look at that big discrepancy. It's about $7 million between the direct spending and the outside spending. In Illinois District 17, it was $9 million versus $16 million. Indiana District 1, $6 million versus $8 million. In Maine District 2, $9.7 million versus $21.9 million. Michigan District 3, $7.8 million on the campaign versus $11.1 million. I wish I had more time to go through all this. I'm going to take a look at Michigan District 07 because there was $14.2 million in direct spending in that one, but $26.4 million in outside spending. I'm curious to see who that was. I think it might be Alyssa Slotkin. Yeah. Okay, it is Alyssa Slotkin. She's ex CIA. And I had a feeling there would be a lot of outside spending in her favor. Now it turned out the outside spending, even though it was very big, was fairly equal. There's 1.9 supporting Slotkin, 2.6 supporting her opponent. Okay, her opponent had an advantage in that of something like $1.5 million, okay, on net. But in direct spending, okay, Alyssa Slotkin had a very big advantage. She spent $11.3 million, and her opponent spent $2.8 million. So that was the determining factor in that race. But boy, there was a lot of external money floating around in that race, probably because of the CIA factor. I'm curious about the Michigan 03 district also. So I'm going to take a look at that as well. I kind of think that might be Rashida, but let's see. That is to say Rashida Tlaib. No, it was not. It was Hillary Scholten, a Democrat, against John Gibbs. Scholten outspent him directly by $2 million. In the outside spending, there was much more in opposition to him than there was to Hillary Scholten. Outside spending, he had $993,000 for him, which is a lot. But $5.5 million against him So you had a net loss of 4.5 million. In Scholten's case, there was a lot against her too, but she had a net loss of only 2.8 million. So the difference in outside spending was much in Hillary Scholten's favor. And she also spent somewhat more directly on her campaign, which is probably why she won. Okay. What's amazing here is a lot of this outside spending was spent on congressional races. When we started going over these races, we had one for the Alabama Senate, and all these other races seem to be in congressional districts. Doesn't seem like there was a lot of outside money hitting the Senate. Okay, so I'm not going to go further with this because okay, I'm out of time. Okay, what you're seeing, though, is a huge amount of super PAC spending. It affects some races very, very seriously. You're seeing also who the super PACs are. Oh, there's a section here for dark money groups. I got to look at that. Can't let this go without looking at the dark money groups. I mean, I guess I should look at the donor category also. Let me see what I got. Top donors. Top individuals funding outside groups. Donor, George Soros. Soros Fund Management, $176,752, all of which went to liberal candidates. Okay, the U lines. Okay, Richard and Elizabeth U lines. Okay, operating out of Lake Forest, Illinois. They're billionaires too. They contributed through their super PACs 86,446,015. That all went to conservatives, of course. 100% went to conservatives. Kenneth C. Griffin. That all went to conservatives also. That was $71 million. Okay, Ken Griffin of Citadel LLC in Chicago. I think he's a hedge funder. Jeffrey Vass and Janine of the Susquehanna International Group, okay, in Bala Sinwid, $56 million. $49 million went to conservatives, and $0 went to others. Then there's Timothy Mellon, retired, lives in Saratoga, New York. $41.7 million it all went to conservatives. So you see, even though Soros spent, that enormous amount, the next 5 big donors, the next 4 big donors, but all went to the Republicans, and together their money totaled more than the Soros donations. You see here, number 6 was Michael Bloomberg, who lives in New York City, of course, and he donated $41.3 million. That all went to Democratic causes, $40.5 million. And then there was Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX KUS. Sam Bankman-Fried spent $39 million. $155,000 of it went to the Republicans. $36 million of it went to the Democrats, if I have that right. Do I have that right? Let me see. Or I should more properly say that $36 million of it went to liberals and $155,000 to the conservative groups. That's what we're really talking about here. Liberal versus conservative. Stephen Schwarzman of the Blackstone Group in New York, $36 million. It all went to the conservatives. Also, Peter Thiel, Thiel Capital, $35 million, all went to the conservatives. Okay, Fred Eisenhower or Eichener from NewsWeb Corp in Chicago, $32 million. It all went to liberal groups. There are a number of other very large things. I'm not going to name them all. There's $25 million from the Adelson Clinic for Drug Abuse Treatment and Research in Las Vegas. And that, is the Adelson fortune. Miriam, O. Adelson, his wife, made those contributions. Ryan D. Salome was Sam Bankman-Fried's partner in FTX, US. So you notice Sam Bankman-Fried gave most of his money to liberal sources. But Ryan Salome gave nearly $22 million to conservative causes. So what they had, decided to do, story goes, is that Sam was going to give to the liberal side. And Ryan was going to give to the conservative side. They deliberately planned it that way. There was about a $15 million advantage there to the liberal side in terms of support. The notorious hedge funder Paul Singer, who is sucking the blood of Argentina and Ecuador dry, he gave $19 million to the conservative side of things. Okay. I could go on with all this, but I'm way out of time on this. I don't know if you found it as interesting as I found it, but I found it to be data that was comprehensive, okay, and fascinating, and it points out that the Supreme Court decision in the CU case was so off base, okay, that it was not funny. What the Supreme Court thought would happen if they freed up the independent expenditures, at least what they said they thought would happen, in no way corresponded, okay, to what happened. We turned huge influence over the elections over to the really big contributors who would go through the super PACs to spend big money on either the liberal side or the conservative side. And you just saw who these top donors were. And I didn't go through all the top donors. I kind of stopped with people who were giving 19 million, and I had already mentioned something like 15 people who were giving more than 19 million to these elections. I mean, this is, if I can, use a little language here. I mean, this is effing ridiculous. It really is. D, comments, please.
I think you should read what April Nano has here. I think those are my comments as well.
Okay. I will be happy to read the comments. I'm just going to take a couple of pills here. I do generally have to take some pills at around this time. Okay, let's see. Okay, so Andy Candy says here also, but have my hands very full. And she says, love you. Well, thank you, Andy Candy. We love you too. Kay Wright says, not good, but hanging in here. Glad you're hanging in, Kay. I always want to see you hanging in. Okay, guys, I'm out of here for tonight, but love you all. We love you, Kay. Andy Candy says, it's such a dirty racket, and the public is who really pays in blood, sweat, and tears. Why does Soros donate? Isn't he Romanian or something? A Romanian or something? No. Soros is a Hungarian Jew whose father managed to avoid the Nazis during the Second World War. After the Second World War was over, he went to London and studied at the London School of Economics. He is a very brilliant person. He studied with Karl Popper, the philosopher there, and he's always said that he's used the views on scientific methodology of Karl Popper to do his trading with. His trading was enormously successful, okay, and allowed him to become a billionaire. He became a billionaire over a very long period of time, but I guess by the 1990s, he was a billionaire. He's often characterized as the hedge funder who broke the Bank of England. I forget in what year that was. At the height of his fortune, he had accumulated $26 billion. He then gave away $18 billion to the foundations that his family controls. But still, that money was given to nonprofit organizations, the Open Society foundations of various kinds. So, from his point of view, he was trying to do good with these particular foundations. Their activities in Ukraine, though, because he gave a lot of money over the years to the National Endowment, for Democracy, and they have played a very regrettable role, in Ukraine in terms of actually supporting, the corruption there and the coup, in 2014. Soros was also doing some things in Hungary, which got his charities actually thrown out, of Hungary, because they thought he was interfering too much, in politics there. I forgot to say, though, the important thing about Soros, and one of the important things about him, he eventually settled in the United States and used that as his base of operations. He became a citizen of the United States. I believe it was sometime in the 1960s or the 1970s. In this country, he's generally supported left of center causes. He supports Israel to some degree, but with qualifications. He's not like a Sheldon Adelson, who views Israel as my country, right or wrong, or at least he did until he died. Soros has not been like that. In the United States, he supported healthcare reform. He contributed $10 million to Healthcare for American Now in 2009, 2008, 2009. And that was an organization working for the public option. So he's generally considered to be left of center in his advocacy. He's very much opposed to Trump and right-wing dictators. He's very much opposed to Putin, has a real blind spot, when it comes to Putin. Apparently, absolutely hates Putin and thinks that he's a total fascist. So his National Endowment for Democracy supported the Ukraine coup, and the U.S. effort to, somehow harm Russia and get Putin out. And that had the very contradictory effect. I'm sure this was an unintended effect, but his support, his activities, in Ukraine had the effect of bringing, a regime to power which was infested by right-wingers, and by Nazis. And of course, Soros is totally opposed to Nazis, yet his activities there and his money, he facilitated the takeover, okay, of the Ukraine government uh, 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 by a political party that was Nazi, was and is, okay, about Nazi infested, specifically Zelensky's party. Uh, so, Soros is a bona fide American citizen. He's been active in American politics for many, many years. Generally, he's active on the left, but never too far left. Sort of like kind of left center and basically neoliberal. He's been a neoliberal part, okay, of the establishment. Okay, he got upset with Obama for not supporting the public option too strongly and felt kind of betrayed by Obama in Obama's first term. Okay. In the run-up to the second term, he mainly supported issues and gave his money in support of issues, but obviously in the more recent campaigns, he's gone back to opposing candidates and supporting candidates. Where he stands right now in 2023, okay, I'm not exactly sure of the nuances where he stands, but I think he's been for the Democratic establishment and for Biden and much against the Donald Trump, and is putting big money in back of the Democratic Party, okay, at this point. Andy says, so why do the rich bastards donate to opposing parties? And she asks, so that they're guaranteed influence in both? Yes, yes, yes. Though obviously some of them are far more in one party, okay, than another, such as Soros, far more democratic, and Peter Thiel, okay, on the other side, who is always for the conservatives. Always, always, always for the conservatives. And the Mercer fortune, of course, is always for the conservatives too. Okay, also the Uline fortune, always for the conservatives. And many of those top donors that I went over are either for the liberal side or for the conservative side and don't contribute to the other side. But there are many people that contribute sizably to both sides, so they think it entitles them to a voice, and what goes on. So Andy Candy says, yes, fascinating stuff. You always do justice to your listeners. I appreciate it. Oh, thank you, Andy. I always try. And Andy says to Bonnie, wow, indeed, Bonnie. Because Bonnie said wow at one point. I forget exactly with respect to what. So Soros just donates for the heck of it? No. He donates. Well, right now, he's donating to try to block, okay, the return of Trump, okay, to the presidency, because he thinks the Democrats are less dangerous from the standpoint of a movement to totalitarianism. Right now, his major issue is probably the democracy issue, and it's probably opposing Trump. It's probably where his money is going right now. He doesn't seem to understand that Biden has his totalitarian problems also. I don't know where Soros stands now when it comes to censorship and free speech rights. Okay, in the old days, by the old days I mean 2010, he was very, very opposed to censorship and much in favor of civil liberties. Soros has written a number of books. They are very interesting books. And full disclosure, uh, in the book, I think if I recall correctly, The Age of Fallibility, I think that was the title of the book. That was a book condemning the war on terror, the so-called war on terror. Uh, and it was arguing that whole thing was a manipulative thing, highly non-rational, not in the interest of the United States. And now getting to full disclosure, I did not know Soros well, but I met him when he came to D.C. in 2000, and 9, and he gave a presentation at George Washington, University. He was there giving talks for 3 days. I know a few things about him. One is that he's a very quietly modest man. That's the impression that he gives. He gives the impression, of being, a humble man. I assume he is not really humble, but that's the impression he gives. So he's a likable man. He is very much for free speech and for discussion and for criticism. And he was brought there by a seminar that was run by a professor from George Washington. And I happened to be in a seminar that was run by the professor. It was not, an academic seminar. It was a seminar. Maybe there were 30 of us in it, 35 of us in it. And each week we would give presentations to the seminar, including myself. I gave some presentations to the seminar. The seminar went on for a few years. I don't know if it's still going on. But while Soros was giving his talks at GW, one day he came to our seminar and he gave a presentation on his book. And he asked us if people would help by reviewing the draft of his book for him. So at the time, I liked the guy, and I was among those who volunteered to do that. And so I gave him a critical review of his book. And I was one of the many people he acknowledged, in his acknowledgments of the book. And he graciously sent me a copy, which I still have. I've read, a number of his other books. They're always well argued, and well reasoned. He is an intellectual. He may be wrong about certain things, but he thinks about things, in a rather deep way. And he has always done that. That's the kind of person that he is. He's very old now. He must be 89 or so. He may be 90. I haven't tracked it actually very closely, but he is older than I by a few years. He has 3 children. Jonathan Soros and Alexander Soros are active in his foundations and are currently running the business end of his foundations. Both are very bright people, and I hope they don't make the mistakes they've made in Ukraine, in the future, I hope they've learned something from what has, gone on there. But I believe both of his sons and himself were actually well motivated characters. And I also believe that where Soros has gone wrong has to do with his becoming, okay, a billionaire. When you become a billionaire, you make the money he made. Okay, by the way, there are other billionaires who greatly exceed his fortune right now. I mean, even if you still view his fortune as at, $26 billion. But, for example, Sheldon Adelson must have gone up to something like $60 billion now. And Michael Bloomberg is somewhere in the 50 billions of dollars. And of course, there are people who are richer than those, and people on the Republican side who are richer than Soros also. So Soros is, demonized by the right as this guy who's richer than God, as if he's the richest man in the world, which he's not, of course. And they demonize him also because of his views, which they consider to be very left wing. I don't consider them, to be very left wing. But what I had started to say is that I've always thought that Soros was very well intentioned, very much for democracy, okay, and did his best as he saw it to try to facilitate it. I think the problems that he's had uh, result from the elitism which developed in him as he grew older and as he had the experience of all that money and the ability to influence the external world, okay, around him. Uh, when you get into that position and you have that kind of power, and I think he would probably maybe recognize the justice, okay, of what I'm about to say. You're still a human being and you still make mistakes. And having all that money gives you the power to make far bigger mistakes than other people make. And mistakes, okay, are, uh, mistakes are absolutely inevitable for human beings. And so when they have that kind of unlimited money and they engage in very, very big activities where the money is important, is used as a tool of influence, when they make mistakes, it has huge negative consequences. And I don't mean, his breaking of the Bank of England, so called. I don't think that necessarily had, very many negative consequences. I don't, blame him for that, okay, at all. But I think some of the political activities went wrong because his political analysis was wrong. Okay, that said, with all the influence he has had and with all the mistakes he has made, he's not done the harm in the world that Trump has done, or Biden has done, or Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, okay, or Hillary Clinton. So I think we need to put him in perspective. And I will say that I think that his sons and their foundations will continue to try to do good. And I hope they have a lot more success in the future than they've had with the National Endowment for Democracy, which has been a problem. But their foundations have supported supported attempts at getting to democracy all over the world. And I think there are many nations in which they've probably had a good effect. Like, for example, they were very active in South Africa. And I think they've had a good effect, okay, there. So I've gone on a long time about Soros. Okay, I know a lot about him. Okay, and I have an opinion. And, okay, I do not tend, okay, to demonize him. Uh, And so Andy said, oops, might have jumped ahead. Sorry. Andy says, oh, Trump got arrested. Finally. I'm tickled pink over it. Well, actually, so am I. I don't share a lot of opinions um, uh, um, they're coming from the left and the right and from all over, that these cases are shallow cases and that, there's nothing to them. I think particularly the Georgia cases, and particularly the federal indictments, do have something to them, that it's plain that, okay, he broke the law, okay, in those instances, and that he should be subjected to punishment, okay, for that. And there's no question in my mind that he fomented what I consider to be the insurrection of January 6th. And for that, he deserves being barred from politics, okay, for the rest of his life, as outlined in the 14th Amendment. I think laws like that uh, okay, are laws that should be sustained, that we really need in order to protect, I won't say our democracy, because we don't have a democracy anymore, but if we're interested, okay, in getting a democracy, we have to enforce those laws and throw out the people who would throw democracy out for sure. Trump would. I think that Biden, in more subtle ways, is throwing out, okay, our democracy as well. As I said before in this program, I think both men are unacceptable as president. And according to my Dump the Corruption campaign, they both need to be thrown out of office, okay, and voted against, because they're both taking big money. So, uh, I'm equally opposed to both of them. But to my mind, but Trump is the clear fascist, okay, and Biden is the inverted but totalitarian, to use an expression that was invented by the political philosopher Sheldon Wallen. Inverted totalitarians, over the long run, are just as dangerous, because in the long run, they also kill democracy. Trump would bring full-blown fascism faster, but Biden is on the road to it too. So Steve says, hi, Andy. And Andy says, oh shit, I was right. Laugh out loud. She says, hi, Wolfie. Andy says, well, Soros should help Georgia some then. Yeah, I certainly hope so. And Steve Wolfbrand says, SSH, sorry. Wow, Doc, I didn't know you had those connections. Soros. Well, he may have thanked me in his book, but he thanked 25 other people too. And I was never a part of his inner circle. I know him, only very sketchily. I do have a friend who was part of his inner circle at one time, but I'll tell you what the inner circle of Soros is like. And I think this goes for the other rich people too. I think it's a pattern, okay, in society with respect to the billionaires. The billionaires are similar to feudal lords, and a lot of people circle around them as their vassals. They are supported to one degree or other by the feudal lords. My friend was someone who was supported by Soros grants for years. Uh, but I think he was too independent for Soros, so he kind of left the Soros orbit, and now he's in someone else's orbit, working for a foundation. From an intellectual point of view, he's a pretty independent person, and I consider him to be a very profound type of thinker. But it's clear that for years he was one of the feudal vassals, okay, of Soros. But I am not. I just had a very limited connection with him and a very limited impression of him. Most of my knowledge of him comes from reading from a distance. Steve says, well, definitely a different take on Soros than what I usually see. Yeah, it's just because I know more about him and his background, and his history over the years and things like that. And I just think, I have a more well-rounded view, okay, of Soros. I'll tell you though, he was way off base when it came to Ukraine and his involvement with the CIA in that. That was terrible. He has been overly negative about the kind of person Putin is. He, has not appropriately recognized all the good things that Putin has done for Russia, and how important a leader he has been. And he has not recognized that Putin has not been a full-blown totalitarian in Russia either. There's a huge difference between Putin and the communist rulers who preceded him. And so I think that Soros became very vulnerable to taking a position that was very pro, the Ukrainian position, and opened him up to getting involved in the way that turned out to have very negative consequences there. Steve Oprin says, yes, when you actually know someone in person, your opinion is different, okay, from those who have not. Yeah, but even though, again, I want to say, I know Soros only slightly, okay, in person. So my view is biased by my personal experience with him, which was very brief, and in which he was very open-minded, okay, and gracious. I don't have, okay, a day-to-day view of him. I don't have, okay, a deep knowledge of him. I have described the feudal organization that, okay, he operated with. I think that's similar to what most of the hedge funders, okay, and investors do. Many of them don't operate with large organizations. They have very small organizations. They might be operating with 10 to 15 people and making huge amounts of money, okay, by doing the financial route, okay, on Wall Street and in currency trading, okay, and things like that, and in hedge funding. So they have small groups of people around them, and they are the feudal lords. So, the absolute rulers of the uh, small set of people they come into daily contacts with them. Soros, at least, has always admitted to himself also the possibility of error and failure, and that he was fallible and is fallible. And I'm sure he still thinks that. When you read his books, you can see it coming through all the way. When you look at his strategy for stock trading, you see the acceptance of fallibility in there. The way stock trades is he develops a theory about how the stocks are going to go. And he uses that theory to determine whether and how much he's going to invest in a stock. And as conditions changed, what he looks for is not the success he's having with the stock. It looks for where he's failing. He's very critical about his own investments and the positions he takes in things. And he has the idea that because he's investing in things, other people are going to follow him. And then that weight of people that are going to follow him, that creates errors in the system itself. And so he becomes very, very aware and is constantly looking for ways in which his strategy is no longer working. And then he shifts his strategy. And that's the way he's lived his life. Not only done his stock market stuff or his hedge funding stuff. So that kind of attitude is the attitude we all should have. Okay, it's a universal attitude. In Ukraine, he made a horrendous error. I hope he realizes that, by now. And that he won't make a similar error, or his sons won't make a similar error. Or his daughter won't be making, any similar errors, in the future. Because the family is obviously still very important in terms of the social and economic weight that it's going to have. What didn't I mention about Soros that's important and relevant? He has been very much for democracy over in Europe, where he was born, and brought up. And he has worked against authoritarianism in Europe and the development of authoritarianism in Europe. He and his interests got thrown out of Hungary because he was fighting the guy who became very close to a dictator there, specifically Viktor Viktor Orban. That's why he was thrown out of Hungary, because he opposed Orban and his movements and his tendencies, to authoritarianism. So in Hungary, he was on the side of the good guys. And in Europe, he's generally been on the side of the good guys. So, and Andy says, I wish Soros knew about the corruption. Here's the problem with Soros, and Dump the Corruption, and with all billionaires, and Dump the Corruption. If Dump the Corruption were successful, their influence over politics would, to a great extent, it would end. And that's the problem. He might know about Dump the Corruption and be very happy with it in principle, but that doesn't mean he's going to call me up and give me $30 million to get, this particular this thing going. because his influence over campaigns in the future, okay, if Dump the Corruption were to become successful, would be far less, okay, than it is now. Andy Candy says Georgia has some bite in their cases. Yes, I think they do have some bite. I think Jack Smith is going to have some bite in his cases also. Steve Wolfman says, I've met many activists in person. Nico, Pasta, and Fee, Jill Stein, also Misty, Tsukuru, Jimmy, and Steph, or Jimmy's wife, that is, and others. I can attest to uh, uh, um, um, to their beautiful souls. Yes, I'm sure you can, Steve. And I think all the people you mentioned, okay, are very well motivated. In fact, I'm trying to help Tsukuru with something right now. Okay, Tsukuru is one of my favorite people. And a very, very well motivated person, a very courageous person. Miles and miles of courage. I greatly admire him. And I like the other people that you've mentioned as well. I've had some contact with all of them, and I have great respect for all of them. I don't know them well enough to attest, okay, to their beautiful souls, okay, as yet. But I can say that Tsukuru certainly has one of those. Andy Candy says, when the seven deadly sins hedge fund guy, Warren Mosler, okay, I know Warren Mosler very, I would say, more than fairly well. I was the guy who led the organizing efforts for what did we call that again? I'm sure, okay, I'm getting it wrong. The Fiscal Sustainability Teach-In Counter Conference of 2010 that took place, okay, on April 28th of 2010. It was held here at George Washington. Okay, the organization work was done by 6 people who were working, okay, at the Correnti Wire blog. That conference, okay, was my idea. I became interested in MMT due to the 7 deadly innocent frauds, and that book, okay, that was written by Warren. Okay. I've co-authored a couple of things with Warren, okay, over the years. He was a central figure in that conference, okay, on April 28th. Okay, I know that Warren has been very generous in his funding of the MMT people when MMT, okay, was getting started, okay, and also through the years. He's been a constant funder. Okay, now Warren is wealthy. He's not as rich as some people. He's not a billionaire. he's a brilliant man, and he is a very fine person to know, okay, and to converse with, okay, and so is his wife, okay, okay. I don't agree with Warren, about everything, but Warren is one of the legitimate fathers, okay, of MMT. He was the first person to put together a synthesis that was identifiable as the MMT synthesis. He did this in his book, The Currency Economics, which he actually wrote back in like 1994 or 1995. Okay, I forget that. What I have to say, okay, about Warren is that I'm much higher on Warren, okay, than I am on George Soros. I said some complimentary things about George, but I know Warren far better, than I know George. And I'll tell you, Warren is a great guy. He is a great guy. And Steve says, Doc hanging out with billionaires, who knew? Well, Warren's not a billionaire. He's wealthy, but he's far from a billionaire. And Andy Candy points out that Orban is still there, isn't he? Yes, he is. Okay, still there. And he is more favorable to Putin, than anyone else in the Eurozone. So I don't really hang out with billionaires. I've hung out, okay, with Warren. He's probably the richest person that I've ever hung out with. Okay, I never hung out with George Soros. Okay, I don't do vassal very well. I'll just say that. Okay, as Bonnie knows, I don't do vassal very well, do I, honey? Okay, well, we've gone way over time tonight. Okay, I enjoyed it. Okay, thank you very much for asking the questions, okay, that got me there.
Insane.
Huh?
Insane.
Yeah. And thank you very much for staying. And I may see you over the weekend. I don't know what Dee's going to schedule at this point, but I'll participate in at least one of her streams over the weekend.
Yeah, we're gonna have to see what's happening over the weekend. Sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah, sometimes, okay, you just don't know. But for sure, I'll be back on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, I'll be doing more BRICS. There's a lot of commentary still to be done on what has happened, okay, with BRICS. There was some great, shows available today on some of the outcomes of BRICS and where it might go, okay, in the future. And so, huh? Oh, please buy me a coffee, and buy Dee a coffee too.
And remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share.
Yeah, and we do very good work, and we really need some coffees. Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so one other thing I want to say. So, okay, on Tuesday then, okay, it's going to be more BRICS, and maybe there'll be some news on the Russian offensive. The word is that there's been considerable planning for a big Russian offensive to occur soon. Some people are saying it's going to be before the end of September, maybe sooner. Okay, and that there's very careful planning that's been going on with respect to this offensive. So there might be some news about it on Tuesday. But in any case, there's going to be a lot of news concerning BRICS. So I'll have a lot to talk about that on Tuesday. And on Thursday, I'll be back with more Dump the Corruption. I'm not sure on Wednesday and on Friday. And on Thursday of next week, I'll be doing a neoliberalism show. There's always a lot to talk about in that particular thing. I'm helping Tsukuru through something as well, though I'm not allowed to discuss it. Okay, we're probably helping Tsukuru through a main way, in some ways, similar ways. Whatever we can do for Tsukuru, we should do. Oh, so Andy said, I love tonight's show. Thanks. I got to look up vasculitis.
Well, it says vassals at the bottom.
What I meant, okay, it was vassals, says Andy. Yeah, I'm sure there's a Wikipedia entry on vassals somewhere. If you can't find it in that entry, there is an entry for feudalism for sure. So if you look it up, okay, under feudalism, there'll be plenty of materials, okay, on lords, okay, and vassals and such, and the feudal system, okay, in general, which was dominant in Europe during the Middle Ages. Okay, good night, everyone.
Yes, good night. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Yes, and I guess I'll see you over the weekend.
Yeah, and for everybody, we'll see you next week for sure.
Mhm.
As well. But I probably always ought to say, if the creeks don't rise, we'll see you next week. Good night.